You had
Yes, record.
one job, one job. Oh, rainbow ball of death is bad news. Okay, did this work? Why I have spinning balls of death. Is this, can you see the screen?
Yes.
It's only because I have now hit record. Which is why Sophie didn't tell me she wanted me to share the screen first. I get it. I see what you're doing there. Okay. So if to review, we are a little bit more potentially aware of vocabulary that's getting thrown around. But more importantly, the beginning place is recognizing our own dominant identities, our own subordinated identities, those that might be visible, those that might be invisible, and what we can do from those experiences. And most importantly, take away from number one is that your worldview could be different than someone else's. It seems like a pretty low lift, but sometimes we get so embedded in our own echo chamber, we just forget that people are experiencing things that we are not experiencing. Or from our kind of like kicked back privileged position, we generally feel entitled to know everything that is happening. And so if a problem is happening to someone else, but not to us, then we cease to generally acknowledge it as a problem because we didn't experience that. So if that is the starting place, that's like the matrix that we're working with as the starting place, then the concept of conscious or unconscious bias, be it positive or negative, is a little bit more easy to understand because we can begin to understand that not everyone is experiencing things the way that we are. And the way that we experience things, we just ladle out on everyone else and assume that these things about them, right? So that's kind of where the conscious and unconscious positive or negative bias box comes in. Then yesterday we did a activity that I highly recommend you repeating as often as you like, using a different lens. So the messages that we learned specifically about race and racism, our own identity, racial identities of people other than our own, even more people. Isn't it fascinating who came up in quadrant 2 and who came up in quadrant 3? And then maybe even now, as time has passed, who also still has yet to come up, and you're like, oh, snaps, I could have put them in a square. Like just being mindful of what comes up first, second, third, not at all the next day, still hasn't happened. But that's really important to understand when you are examining without judgment the messages you have learned regarding the social identity that you're using as the lens, which we did for race and racism. So then today, the idea is being a better ally. So before we get too deep into this, I just want to acknowledge first off, you can still text message me at 202 670 4262. They're starting to gain momentum, which I really appreciate. I feel like sometimes y'all are like, I don't know what to ask her, or like, I don't want to bother her. Phone's on silent. I will get to it when I pick up my phone, which is a lot. So feel free to text message. But I also want to acknowledge that the concept or the idea of an ally or an advocate oftentimes can get connected to action. And I don't want this webinar to be about the difference between an ally and an advocate. So, heady people, please put your definition and linguistic history reports to the side. Okay. I'm going to use the word ally because I'm going to just generally imply that you're trying to help somebody out, right? And maybe in trying to help somebody out in some way, you're trying to make a better connection with somebody else. You're trying to advocate on behalf of someone else. But if we get too far down into whether we should be using the word ally or we should be using the word advocate, I think what ends up happening is it splinters into how we are all doing whatever we want to call it wrong, right? So, like, I want to advocate for people. Well, you can't speak for me, right? But I have a seat at the table and I want to make sure all voices are heard. Well, fine. Why don't I have a seat at the table? I don't know. The door's open, right? Like, that is not the conversation I want to have. It is a helpful conversation for some people to have. But I think underneath that is understanding the goal that we have if we use being an ally as an umbrella term is ideally working with the hot mess toolbox that came with our life. Some of you may still be like, I don't identify as a hot mess. Phone a friend, because yes, you are. So the toolbox that you bring to each scenario, what can you do? What's the goal of employing that toolbox in regarding being an ally for, to, with someone else? Is that a good assumption to start off with? Otherwise, we're going to rabbit hole down into linguistics, which I am happy to do, but it's not usually very productive inside of the time frame we have, and it doesn't dictate my slides. So if we ask ourselves, what is the goal of being an ally? I think that we are going to use the lens of a business or an organization just because it's sometimes easy, right? So somehow we know discrimination is bad for business. So if my website, or when I'm doing marketing to corporate market or something for consulting, etc., if I only come at this conversation that discrimination is bad for your business, often what ends up happening is like a legal argument of like what is protected or what is not protected. And I think it is important to understand that making a discriminating choice that is not illegal means that you're running a business and you're picking and choosing like which marketplace you're going to actually target, etc. When we talk about discrimination, like, oh yeah, that's a terrible thing to do. But it's actually seemingly not motivating enough for people to look at their business practices from what I would call like a moral level. So just because it's legal doesn't mean it's moral, and just because it's moral doesn't mean that it's legal. Those are two very separate things. I had a conversation actually right after our webinar yesterday with a incident that happened on a college campus last semester. So now, of course, 3 months later, their college campus is trying to figure out what to do about it. And protected speech, academic freedom, protected speech leads to more speech. That's how you know it's protected. You are not legally protected from being insulted or offended. You are not legally protected from not being a douche canoe, right? Like, welcome to the US Constitution, douche canoe, all you want to here. That's what we stand for, as long as it doesn't create harm, violence, or affect someone in a negative way. That's when we move into subjectivity. I am not a lawyer. I was a ceramics major. So if we can go with an ally means this, and that generally speaking, being a douche canoe might not be the best way to recruit and retain customers, employees, friends, we kind of get it. But now what do we do about it? So I don't want any organization or any friend or any social media profile or something to ever have to apologize for existing or being open. I think that the clearer you are, the less likely you are to have to apologize for being open. If I use Chick-fil-A as an example, so Chick-fil-A's been in the news a lot because of LGBT discrimination, and as an LGBT person, it is usually very off-putting that I use them as an example, but they are closed on Sundays nationally, even if they're an independent franchise, because that is congruent with their company's owners' morals and the way that they have designed the company. There's something really oddly refreshing to me about a company that has morals and makes business decisions based on those morals, right? So I don't necessarily agree with those particular ideas or interpretations, but at least it's consistent in how they run their business. At least now, legally speaking, that is protected behavior. So if we are looking at our relationships, work doesn't have to just be this business entity, and allyship doesn't just have to be this individual entity, but a company can function as an individual and an individual can function as an organization. Either way, being an ally is work. It is a journey. It is an ongoing experience. I don't care. I do not care what friend liked you, who liked what joke, checked off on it, they liked the Facebook post. I don't care. That is not validation as a free pass that that's always good to go in every single scenario, because you have to be paying attention in the moment to the people that could be impacted consciously or unconsciously by what you're saying. That's the work. So, okay, now I'm completely overwhelmed. Where do I start? So what I want to invite you again is the optical illusion idea, right? So if you are about to consciously engage in a better connection with someone else, before you even start, what could be happening on their side, right? What could they be seeing that is wildly different than you? If you see two faces and you're about to engage with a candlestick, you're already starting reacting very differently to the same situation, right? So the texting thing, I don't know who texts what. That's the bonus, right? So when someone text message, they're talking about a conversation that occurred on a WhatsApp. So here's my thought. If you're having a deep conversation on WhatsApp, there is a very good possibility that one person's sincerity level could potentially be misinterpreted just by virtue of it coming in on WhatsApp. If the post before it is a donkey surfing, and then suddenly there's this very sincere comment, it might seem out of context. So if you want to have a sincere conversation, you might have to do that face to face or in a more intimate format that is like writing a letter, like using a pen. There are different ways to kind of be sincere and intimate that really vary based on how the platforms are used. Now, I know WhatsApp or Slack or things like that are how people communicate. Right now, Zooming, I used to use Zoom because I closed more deals because I had face-to-face contact than just emails back and forth. Now everybody is Zooming, whether it's a happy hour or your third grader schooling or mandatory family things. Why has a pandemic come with mandatory family meetings now? I don't know. So the meaning of this has dramatically changed because of how it's being used. If you can pay attention, I want you to remember this image, because sometimes you are the person on the left and sometimes you are the person on the right. There is a very good possibility that you are verbally word cloud dumping. We call it venting at work on somebody else. And what they hear are very clean, consistent patterns that affirm the story they already had about you. So you vent away. I already know what's happening. I've seen this movie before. There is also a possibility that you could be the other person, where you have practiced saying something, you've really thought about it, and you're going to put out this message that is very clean and well-intended, crafted message that is received as a word cloud, because what are the ulterior motives? What does this even mean? How could this possibly happen? How could someone feel some way 72 hours ago and then today, poof, feels magically different? What is going on? So you could receive it messed up, you can receive it clean. You can communicate knowingly messed up or knowingly clean or unconsciously messed up. And then I think it's very important to mention unconsciously clean is if, for example, someone wants to ask about how my parents died. So my parents died in 1993. I have a rehearsed way of talking about this that makes the person asking feel a little better, because they could feel bad. They didn't even know, but now I have to explain to them. So I have crafted a little story that is very cleanly about how my parents have died, that takes the guilt and shame away as much as I can from the person who didn't know that they shouldn't have asked that question in this given moment. And it ends in a joke, because that's how I tie everything up in a little bow. It is practiced. But that doesn't mean that it's going to land in a practiced, contained way. Remember this image. When we talk about miscommunication, it is important to understand that if you are asking who is suffering the most in a given scenario, this is your scenario, it is important to know that you have no idea what is going on. Now, I've shared with y'all this week that I have been like super on the struggle boat around homework because I signed up for an MBA program. Why on earth did I do this? So this weekend, while we're all panicking because our homework is due at midnight and none of us have any idea what we're doing, somebody put out like, would anybody be interested in a study group? And I'm like, me right here. I would. So I set up the Zoom. I like white womaned all over this, right? Like I sent out a doodle to people. I posted the Zoom link all over the little chat boxes. And what ended up happening is nobody showed up at 2 o'clock. I really needed a study group and no one came. And the person whose idea it was, who originally reached out to me, I texted her and she was very excited, see you at 2. And then all of a sudden didn't show up at 2, didn't respond to my text, and the little blue boxes, they don't even say they're delivered anymore. What happened to her phone? What is going on? Why is she not in my study group? Who suffers the most in that scenario? Imagine all the possibilities that could have happened as to why someone who called a study group at 2 o'clock no-showed, didn't come, and now the messages are not being delivered. Has she been kidnapped? Has she lost her phone? Did her phone get flushed down a toilet by some rogue child who's being homeschooled? Does she like get annoyed that some old person wants to, is like very eager beaver to be in a study group? All of these things are possible, and it's up to me to keep those options open, because what happens is we end up assuming the burden goes to the other person, right? They're a slacker. They're one of those millennial college students who doesn't take any of this shit seriously and doesn't understand that when you make a commitment at 2 o'clock, you should be there. You should be there at 1:55. If you're there later than 1:55, you're late. Right? That is okay, boomer, or in this case, Xer. What is interesting is we put the burden out here, which means that we're not taking any responsibility for it. And by doing that, we ask them, whoever the them are, to catch up, represent everybody else, speak up for others, do all the education while I sit back occasionally in my privilege and entitlement and maybe pick up some new vocabulary words, possibly affirm some stereotypes, and go from there. That's the dynamic you break down when you're doing ally work. Being an ally is work. Exactly what isn't an ally is making them work for you. Being an ally is like getting very uncomfortable often, or to uncomfortable to a comfortable limit, if that makes any sense. And you are doing the work. You are lifting the burden from someone else. So how do you prepare to do this lifting on behalf of someone else? So a story that I like to think about is writing a paper, not because I'm back in school, but because some of us do this. So when you write, like when I wrote my book, for example, the first thing I did was word cloud into this book. Then eventually I had kind of a working draft, right? So I printed that draft of my book, triple space with extra wide margins, and I gave it to a million different people to review. And I hoped with curiosity and generosity that they would read the book and then give me edits back. I tried to share my authentic self. I was super vulnerable by giving them my like little book baby, and I hoped that I would get edits back. Being an ally is about, one, recognizing that you write a story about other people. Don't pretend you don't. I used to, in the shitty diversity trainings, I used to pretend I never wrote a story, because being a good white person, good white woman person, meant that I was a clean slate. I never wrote a story or made a judgment or assumption ever, because if I were to assume, I'd make an ass out of you and me. We all have done this. But the reality is that we make judgments and assumptions so that we feel safe and prepared. We're not going to delete that from us. Whether we're hiring someone or training someone or trying to figure out if we're going to move on a sidewalk. Are we going to move to the left or the right? Are we going to hold our space? Are we going to cross the street? Are there sidewalks we're not even going to be on? We need to feel safe and prepared. That does not make us right, but will feel right. But more importantly, our story does not make us accurate. So what I'm going to ask us to do is to take responsibility for the judgments and assumptions that we make, because our lived experience have taught us that if we operate with these judgments and these assumptions, then we will feel safer or more prepared. And then print that story off triple spaced with extra wide margins and hand it over to the other person, and curiously, generously seek edits. By leaving room for edits, we are going to be able to be more authentic and more vulnerable and more accurate in the given moment, even though we started from a place where we felt more prepared and safe. Being prepared and safe is important. That for some of us, waking up and showing up on this Zoom call was already an active revolution. Look, I'm here again. Boom. Right? So then now, if I'm prepared and safe on some mild or significant degree, now how can I take the space in between my own story that makes me feel prepared and safe to listen to the truth about someone else? That's what leaving room for edits is. We can be right, but we can also go the extra step and actually become accurate based on the information that the other person is providing. So being an ally to all is about them and less about you. So often in these conversations, something will fire about like, well, what about this? Or what do I need to do? Or what? Yeah, it's not about you. It's about them. And it's about seeking actual information that represents their life that they're willing to share with you because they are also making judgments and assumptions about you based on your behavior patterns, your habits, the past experience they've had with you or with people like you, whatever that means, so that they are disclosing bits of information that will then make my story more accurate. The key is to keep listening. If you keep it about them is required in order to listen. You have to have somebody else to actually engage in listening. Now, I can get super meta here because you can also challenge yourself to keep listening to yourself. When you're being self-reflective, yesterday, a lot of your own stories came up and you had to listen to them and take learnings from those stories that were either good or bad or positive or negative, some of which you've kept, some of which you've edited, and keep listening to your own internal stories and your own internal habits, because then you're practicing the skill of listening to other people and their stories and the bits and pieces they feel safe and prepared enough to share with you. If you keep it about them, then you can change the story they have written about you. So when we start talking about changing culture, what is particularly interesting is it doesn't matter what is written down. It doesn't matter always what you did in the past or what's on your resume or what murals are in your wall or what your screensaver is on your computer. What you need to be able to do is showcase an evolution and a change in behavior. And by showcasing an evolution and change in behavior, it's evidence that you heard, that you were listening, and that maybe you even are still listening. And that is how that story will begin to evolve. Another call that I was on yesterday is another white woman who caused some ish, I think is probably the Cliff Notes version that I need to share in a Facebook group. And she did the thing that, of course, where she's only reaching out to other women of color to find out if they can, like, they weren't offended and will they validate and approve the thing that she did. To which, of course, they're like liking the post, like, I saw this, but I'm not validating it, but she took it as validation. So this is an example, particularly right now, white folks, that you may be hearing when people say, come for your cousins. This is what this means. So I am a white woman. So I messaged Laura on the Facebook and was like, hello, Laura. I think that you and I should have a one-on-one time, which resulted in her typing a TED Talk into my Facebook Messenger. And I was like, no, 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 no. Here's some boundaries. Here's my online scheduler. You can set up some time with me and I, for free, will talk to you off this white woman ledge that you are on. Her urgency is not my problem, and I had to put in boundaries because, whoa. So yesterday was the magical call. And her response to the troubles that she's caused is that, she, quote, she has made the Facebook page unsafe, so she's going to leave the group. To which I said, could you please underestimate your power, please? I was like, this is a Facebook group. People have lives. There's a global pandemic going on. There's a very good chance no one will even notice you have left the group. We are not sitting on the edge of our seats going, God, what's Laura going to post today? That's not happening. So, like, check your own sense of agency. And if you really want to do something, you have to stay in the group and showcase that you have learned and listened and that you have different behaviors. That's what you need to do. And she actually said, well, I don't know, that makes me so uncomfortable. And I was like, oh my God, what's it like being alive? Because there's a lot of people who are dead right now, and that was really uncomfortable. So she's still in the group as of this morning. Stay tuned. Okay, if you have questions, because I'm bringing up a lot of stuff, feel free to text message again, 202-670-4262. This is going to come up a lot in this one because this is the application piece of what we are learning. Anybody want to say anything or have any questions out loud? My token extrovert Katrina, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to. Okay, we're good? Okay, let me check my texty things. Nope, we're good. Okay, plowing along. So, speaking of privilege, When we are challenged, what we really like is a nice list, don't we? Like, could you possibly put this on like a pamphlet or some condensed version? This is how TED Talks even started. So here's your stupid list. And it's impossible to do, but I made a list for you. So if you wanted to be an ally to all, just the basics, please. Let's start at the beginning. As if my tone feels condescending, that's because it's the chosen font. So, number one, don't use pejorative language. Fun fact, what is pejorative language? You're going to have to engage in a conversation to really find out. But if you're using language and you do anything with your head or your shoulders or point while you're saying it, it's probably pejorative. Okay, number two, decline to gossip. Why? That's the fun thing. But if you're like, tell me more, you're gathering information because information is power, and that is not being an ally. Not saying it's not powerful, but that's not being an ally. Respect privacy. If someone has told you something and you then take it to go tell other people, like I just did with Laura, um, that's not cool, right? Now, the chances of you being able to narrow down which Laura I'm talking about, I think makes it still a little private, and it's an excellent example. But I don't know who you know, right? I don't know what information people want to be shared, so I have to check. I have to ask, is this public information? Are you telling me this? Is this a gift for me? Or is this something that everybody knows and I'm just now learning? Also, you're not entitled to know everything. So if somebody told somebody else something and you heard about it and you didn't, that doesn't mean they don't like you. It means they may have forgotten to tell you, or they don't want to tell you, or your time hasn't happened yet. Taking notes, pay attention to names, pronouns, things people are talking about themselves. We do this already when people are dating or got engaged, and all of a sudden they're not talking about the wedding anymore. That probably means the engagement got called off, right? Or like, how's stopping drinking going? Like when I've been sober for almost 17 years, and when I first went sober, everybody would kind of like tiptoe around whether or not I was drinking or not. It was very interesting because I am in the room. I see you doing very strange behaviors. Why don't you just talk to me? Right? So take notes and pay attention and engage in a conversation. You're not entitled to know everything, and you can always ask actual legitimate questions. Avoid generally exclusive behaviors. One of my favorite ones of this is all the men over here, all the women over here. That's fascinating. I would imagine voting wise, you may use the term like American because Americans can vote. First off, there's two different continents with the word America in it, so depending on what you're talking about, you might want to clarify. No, you just mean U.S. citizens. Well, there's U.S. citizens who are not allowed to vote either, so what do you mean by that? So just being mindful that there are people who are not allowed to that are included in the words that you might be using. How are you using exclusive language or exclusive behaviors, and do you mean it? If you mean it, run with it. But if you don't mean it, now you know about it. And remember, like micro inequities, whether we're in Zoom or in person, there are power dynamics that happen that may seem subtle or small, but the pile up of them and even the individual can actually really devalue others. So paying attention to who gets interrupted, who's asked to take the notes, right? Who gets ignored or whose comments aren't needed, right? Or who can you speak for, but you can't speak for other people. Um, we talked a little bit about this in our very first meeting when I think it was Shannon and Ace, I hope I get this right, were drafting a statement. And I was like, okay, so if this is a director's call and you have a statement that's being drafted by two people who are not on the director's call, then it is possible that it will be perceived that non-directors are doing the labor of creating a draft of a statement that will then just be signed off on or edited by the directors because there's a power dynamic there. So I would also encourage, as directors, you also be really thinking about what should this statement say and have an idea instead of just waiting for this to then edit it, because it could be perceived as like the statement has been knighted by the directors versus a collaborative experience. So just being mindful of what that could mean or checking in. I made that up. I don't know if you felt that way or not, but you could have. So doing a bulleted list is seems good, but it's actually quite hard because now is a list of things that you're like, snaps, I didn't do that. Snaps, I don't do that. Snaps, I don't know what that means. Oh, wait, I do that one. So here's how I would do it. You might be familiar with the golden rule. Are y'all familiar with the golden rule, just out of curiosity? If you were speaking to me, you generally start sounding like pirates because you're like, treat others how art I wish to be treated. And it's in that weird bad tattoo font. Judgment. So here's what's interesting about the golden rule. The golden rule, and I talked a little bit about this before, is not good enough. And what I mean by that is treating people the way I want to be treated is making a big assumption that people want to be treated the way I do. The good example I like to use is just cussing in general. I have clients that if I said the word shit, they would be like, hey, what is going on? So I have been paying attention to what language y'all are using with each other or me beforehand. And so as long as I don't go to that extreme, I feel like I can loosen my cussing filter. I'm also not wearing Spanx. So there's a correlation between those filters and Spanx. However, it is possible that someone's like, we're paying for this and she's using cuss words. What is happening? Right? But in my golden rule, I don't find these words offensive at all. And I have a very functional vocabulary. Thank you very much. Because if you can take the same 4-letter word and use it in 100,000 different ways in the same sentence, that's creative. Platinum rule is about treating other people the way they want to be treated. The important piece here, and I believe Kellen, you were used as the example on all of the webinars, so you're up again. But the example that we used was pizza. So my favorite pizza toppings, do we remember? This is a very important thing. What if we ever go out to lunch together? My favorite pizza toppings are weird and not pizza toppings that other people would like, which just means more pizza for me, right? Like this is fantastic.
Pineapple, right, Jess?
What?
Olives and pineapple?
Olives and pineapple for the win. And before I tried very hard to become a vegetarian, I don't think I could pull off vegan. What was it? Do you remember? Kellen, you specifically named it. What was it when I was still eating meat, if we call this meat? Remember? It's the most obvious one. Or no?
I don't recall.
What's your favorite pizza topping?
Mine's pepperoni.
Ding! You win! But I'm trying not to eat pepperoni, which I don't know if it actually constitutes as meat at that point. And more specifically, while I have been sheltering in place, I am missing Tony's pizza rolls more than I could possibly have imagined. I also have a short video on how to eat Tony's pizza rolls without burning the roof of your mouth if you are interested in a helpful resource. I don't know if the pepperoni that is in the Tony's pizza rolls constitutes as meat, but it's close enough and it's greasy. And when you eliminate meat, you basically eliminate grease. It doesn't exist anymore. So I have ruled it out. The platinum rule is asking you, where do you want to go to lunch? What do you want to eat at the lunch? If we go to a pizza place, do you need one with a salad bar? Do you like one with draft beer? Is bottled beer okay? I don't care as long as they have green olives, because that's my favorite. Thank you for asking. That is what the platinum rule is. And in order to employ the platinum rule, you have to ask questions and listen to those answers and then modify your behaviors, because the platinum rule, thank you Tony Alessandra for this research, the platinum rule is treating others the way they want to be treated. That involves a lot of listening, right? So if we were to take a very mild, non-controversial topic that is not remotely timely, let's take police brutality for just a second, right? So police, I do a lot of training with police, and they are trained to stop the behavior. So then I always ask the very fun question, and I'm like, just out of curiosity, if your training is to stop bad behavior, which bad is pretty subjective, but if your training is to stop bad behavior, why does it result in death versus stopping? And generally speaking, the training answer that I get is when they're dead, the behavior has stopped. There's no chance of the behavior starting again. That is a very hard place for me to lift the conversation. Jokes are not really appropriate there, but the platinum rule works out great. So then I will say, instead of treating people the way that you think they want to be treated, and that being pay attention to who's in the center of the conversation, is that the golden rule is this person wants to be treated better and this bad behavior to stop. So I'm intervening and stopping the bad behavior. Except sometimes you're intervening the wrong person. So if we were to take the video, for example, of a white journalist who is pointing out Black protesters, I think this was actually in Detroit, shout out, Black protesters pointing out white people who were damaging property, and the police came over, surprise, white people are saying they're doing it, the black people are saying they are doing it, and the white people are causing the damage. They are actively doing the damage to the property. It is the black protesters who were pointing it out that got arrested. No one was listening to the journalist who had video footage. No one was listening to the white people who were causing the damage. Eyeballs, look, damage is happening. What was happening was must stop the behavior, and that's where all the unconscious bias comes up. The idea of the platinum rule, I believe, would revolutionize how the police work. And what that is that it's de-escalating to the point that I don't know the answers. I have the training that I'm going to set aside, like cultural competency, and then from a cultural humility place, I'm going to actually assess the situation and de-escalate the situation first before doing what my training has eventually told me is stop the behavior. So I use this as an example, even though it may seem a little extreme, and I recognize that it is very up right now, but I think it is a very powerful experience of what it means to assess and listen first before resulting back to your own biases or your own training. The difference there is the listening, is the observation, is the de-escalation before escalating. So with that, thank you for letting me do that. Oh, I forgot my mustache thing. So you have to ask questions. So what is important about questions is that we are exceptionally good at asking inappropriate questions. We're not actually very good at asking appropriate questions. So what is strange is when you ask a question without thinking about its content, there's a good chance you probably shouldn't have asked that question. When you ask a question that you are really thinking about the contract, you usually know you're not supposed to be asking that question. So you're thinking about how to ask the question you know you shouldn't be asking, that you're trying to figure out a way to ask the question. Now, why should you not be asking the question? Usually, you should not be asking the question because you want the answer for the wrong reason. You want the answer for your own gathering of information because information is power. It's gossip. Tell me more, right? If you don't have anything nice to say, come sit next to me. There's a Steel Magnolias quote. Okay, so what you need to be able to do is understand that questions that result in the other person openly sharing more information that you previously did not know. That's when it's an appropriate question. So what I mean by that, the Cliff Note style, you need to ask a question you don't know the answer. When you don't know the answer, you're legitimately asking a question. When you think you know the answer, or you really just want to know what they're going to say, you have a pre-prescribed answer in your head. So you might very well be validating something that's already happening in your head because you feel like you already know them better than they know them. That's not ally behavior. So this is a little tip. Questions that lead to more conversation, those are the good ones. Questions that lead to less conversations, those are usually the bad ones. Good? Okay, so if we're doing this list situation, platinum rule, listen, ask appropriate questions, know the limits of what you can or cannot help with. Someone may choose you to ask, need help from or need services of, and you might be like, very bad choice. You should not come here for this help. I don't even know what that means. Nope, question marks, not happening. Trust the person's agency, that they have enough knowledge and that they have done a resource inventory of everything in their life and how pathetic it might be that you are the best resource they have for this particular topic. That could be very bad news for them, but you are the best resource they have. So in that moment, you don't have to know all the answers. It's not an Olympic competition, but what it is an opportunity to shut your face and listen. Now that you know you don't know, you can ask way more appropriate questions. Notice I didn't say like rude questions, right? Rude questions are often asked out of ignorance. But if your intention is ignorance versus gossip or something like that, then it's a harmless mistake, right? Like, oh, that's not a very good question. I don't want to answer that one, right? I also think if you have grandparents or access to a grandparent, if you would not ask your grandparents the question, maybe you shouldn't ask anybody the question, right? Like that's a good barrier. I don't know that I necessarily ever really needed to know or even imagine what my grandparents' genitalia looks like. There is genetic DNA evidence that something happened and worked. That's already too much information for me. I don't need to know this information. So when we start talking about bodies or parts that are not socially acceptable to talk about in your private life or at home, that's when you know that's probably inappropriate. But when you're like, tell me more, what is that like? What is your housing situation like? When's the last time you ate food? How are you doing? Right? When you ask those questions, I legit do not know the answer. And these are very important, pressing questions that you may or may not actually be able to help with, but at least you would have more information and then you can make a referral to actually help someone. Then, whatever it is you didn't know, write it on a post-it note and then use the Google and go learn. Don't ask them to teach you in the moment, especially if they are in a crisis. That is your job. Every single thing that happened in the conversation, and you're like, who? What? What is going on? What is happening? What's going on? Make a list. I was on another call the other day. We were talking about Zoom productions for large conferences, and somebody was talking about their OBS system because their OBS system is part of their son's PlayStation system or something gaming related, something unknown. All of this entire category. Zero ideas. Had a whole list. Googled it. Found out I got the things were related to video games. That was enough information. Why? I don't know basically anything since Zelda. I don't know anything about video games. And I think Zelda is new now and it's the new old. I don't know. Anyway, know what you know what you don't know. That's a key. Listening for descriptors, mirroring language, trusting them. Remember, being an ally is about them. Trusting them that they probably know their situation better than you do. Now, there is some pieces of like you can observe somebody's unconscious behavior, so you know them better than they. Yes, that is true, but that's not what I'm talking about. In being an ally, trust that they have sorted out their life and decided these are the variables that you need to know, and you do not need to know these variables that you ain't getting to know. So they've ranked them. So after you handle these, you might get more. You might not, depending on how you handle them. Just trust them. They feel safe and prepared by choosing you. They are choosing how much to disclose to you, and they are watching for your response. And if your response is listening, possibly asking more questions so that they maybe give you more information, then you are actively engaging in a healthy conversation. Yesterday, some of you had access to an authentic conversation. People spend a lot of money, or at least they used to fly me into their organizations to teach people how to have authentic conversations. Here's a tip. If you don't want it to end, that's an authentic conversation. If you're like, get me out of here, that's probably not an authentic conversation, but they may be authentic feelings. Pay attention and listen. That's key. We've all used bad listening skills. We all know when someone isn't really listening to us, and we know when we're not really listening. Ask questions respectfully. Remember that the other person knows themselves better than you do, especially in these really delicate, fragile, sensitive moments or conversations. These are privileged engagements. Being an ally to all is about them, not about you. Now, when I said know what you don't know, there's three kinds of knowledge. What you know, what you know you don't know, and then everything else. And everything else is always expanding. So all knowledge, you know this. Now you know, ready? What's my middle name? You don't know. Now you don't know. When was my birthday? I told you I'm a triple Virgo, so that's narrowed it down a little bit. But you now know that you do not know. And then sometimes a sense of entitlement will bubble up. Remember that feeling. Remember when you don't know what color socks I'm wearing. Oh, this is 3 in a row. That sense of entitlement will bubble up and you're like, please tell me, I need to know. When you know you don't know, you are not entitled to knowing, but you are responsible for knowing that you didn't know in the first place. And then the rest of knowledge just continues to expand the more that you know. When you can understand that, then you're less defensive that you didn't know something in the first place. But more importantly, you're less defensive when you didn't know something. because people will disclose things and then you're like, what? I didn't know that. Why didn't I know that? Why didn't you tell me that thing? Right? So then that happens. That's de-escalating. And remember, that's escalating. De-escalating is it's not about you, it's about them. So shut up and listen to the thing you didn't know that now they have chosen to share with you. That's it. You go from like defensive to receiving a gift. Questions? Comments? How are we doing? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Do your homework. Do not ask other people to do this. Specifically right now, because race and racism and white privilege and white fragility, and Robin DiAngelo is loving this right now because White Fragility is her book, and that is a very easy thing to Google, and it is sold out currently. I think it is important to understand that reading a book is not going to solve your problem. However, reading a book is better than baking bread, right? Unless you are baking bread to make a sandwich while you're reading a book, then you're just making the experience better. Note your own discomfort and your own confusion, and then seek a source of that discomfort and confusion. Not in the person. They might be able to illuminate to you this pattern, but you're not going to listen to it if they illuminate it in the first place. That's your job to figure it out. Across these 4 webinars, what is still popping up for you that you're like, that's that thing again. I don't know what that is. Why? I don't want to talk. I hope she doesn't call on me. Whatever those things are, that's when you know that you're uncomfortable or possibly confused. Great. I have mentioned a lot of information in 4 1.5-hour sessions. Get your money's worth. But now you need to do your homework. And then share your experiences with like people. And what I mean by like people, as a white person, if I want to talk about my anti-racism work, me recognizing that I was a white person in 2003 when I was born in 1974. Between 1974 and 2003, I never had to check a box that said I was a white person because it was a given that I was a white person. Only other people had to check those boxes. Did I ever notice that? Nope. What made me notice that? Having to check a box that said I was white. What? This is a thing? Had no idea. Okay, well, where that's mildly embarrassing, being able to actually have a conversation with other white people who identify as anti-racists. More importantly, what's the difference between anti-racism work and anti-blackness work? What's the difference between people of color and BIPOC, right? Black, Indigenous people and people of color. What does that mean? What's happening? What's going on? I can have that conversation in my subordinated marginalized groups. Because in my subordinated marginalized groups where I feel safe, I'm using air quotes, I should make those safe spaces as challenging as possible. So when I go, for example, to my upper class, well-educated, white lesbiterian brunches that have all now moved on Zoom, where we chat each other quinoa recipes, right? In that space, we should be talking about white privilege, cisgender privilege, literacy, access, upper class privilege. We should be talking about these things in there. In that safe space, we can also talk about our dominance, our privilege, what it means to actively be benefiting from a system, how we're doing work against this. We can make those safe spaces safe by having uncomfortable conversations and sharing the experiences that we are learning as we are learning. That's what those subordinated, marginalized, identity-based community spaces can be for. So if I identified as a person of color, what if I was in my person of color religious group or my fraternity or my sorority or a neighborhood group or something? If I was in a group that was based specifically on my racial identity that in this case is subordinated or marginalized, what if in there we talked about Christian privilege, or we talked about if we were heterosexual, we could talk about that. We could talk about our ability or what it means to be employed in the middle of a COVID crisis. There's things that you can talk about in your subordinated, marginalized, community-based identities from your dominant privileged group that in that space is sharing the learnings and asking more questions and doing your homework, and it's not burdening other folks because it's your safe space. You're all there willingly to have these engaging conversations at no risk. Know yourself. Knowing yourself allows you to know what you don't know. And it's a repeat cycle. It's like washing your hair. You have to just keep doing it over and over and over again. Being an ally is about being comfortable with what you don't know and taking responsibility for this lack of knowledge. That is all. If I said that at the very beginning, though, we'd have to deconstruct this sentence by what do you even mean? If we are now going to put this into action, spoiler alert, grab your flowcharts. If we're going to go into a call of action, I do not think that the call of action is how to be a perfect person to all people, all times, in every given situation. Nobody knows how to do that. But you could be less of a douche canoe some of the time, right? So my general kind of mantra is to do the best you can with what you got some of the time. So I believe this is very handy little flowchart. Just keep it by your computer, keep it by your phone. It helps with emails, probably will help with WhatsApp texts, Slack channel things, conversations, statement letters, hiring, firing letters, training letters, etc. When you are about to engage with someone else, you are not entitled to a partner. That does not mean that the someone else is going to be like, I would love to, but you are decided, I want to have a better connection. Your posture will change, your attitude and your energy will change. That is step one. Okay. Then you're going to have an intentional conversation. Again, you're not entitled a recipient. You're not entitled for it to work. You're not entitled for a partner. You can do this with your own voices in your head if you want to. They're also entitled to not play with you or respond. So if you're going to make a better connection, now you're going to have an intentional conversation. Please note, step 3, shut up and listen to other people as if they are wise. Listen to them that you're trying to engage and have an intentional conversation with as if they know something that you don't know. Fun facts, they in fact do. Maybe it's how to play dominoes. Maybe it's how to make good banana bread. Maybe it's that your fly's down. Who knows? But they know something that you don't know, and you should listen to them as if they are wise. It will shift you listening for the information you're seeking versus actually being an open space that is actually listening to the person that supposedly you want to make a better connection and have an intentional conversation with to begin with. Once that has occurred, you can take the information that you have gathered and begin to form the message that you want to deliver. The best thing I think is important about intention and forming the message is y'all are all so amazing. I am certain that no one has ever broken up with you. Maybe that is true. I have been fired a billion times and have been broken up with by everyone except so far one. So what is important to mention is that after I have been dumped and or fired, I, for years, will replay that conversation. I will replay what I should have said. I will replay in the entire transcript. I will keep their statements exactly the same, but I will constantly switch out and change what I said so that at the end of it, I feel like a winner. I don't know if this is a Texan thing, but you can't break up with me, I break up with you. It might be months later, but in my mind, I will eventually have broken up with you because actually prior to that conversation, remember when I didn't take the dishes up and I didn't put them away? That was actually me breaking up with you. Then I feel better. That is manipulating an actual experience so that I feel like a winner. That is not being an ally, nor is that having a better connection or an intentional conversation. I'm trying to win something that I actually know I lost. When you form your message, you have an idea of what you are trying to say. It doesn't mean it's going to work, but you actually have like a thesis of what it is you think you're going to say. Then the intended meaning of that message also gets clarified and articulated, right? So this is me forming the message. Maybe it's a mental draft. Maybe it's a draft of an email. Okay, now you play, what is the intended meaning of this message? So I suggest wear multiple hats. Review your draft. Give yourself the ability to be curious and generous and authentic and vulnerable and seek edits to your own draft of the own message that you have formed and check on what is the intention. So when you receive stuff and you're like, what does this even mean? What's going on? What's happening? You are questioning their intention, and it is very possible that they were very clear on their intention. When you are sending it out, you also need to form and identify what is the actual intention here. Then, no matter what it is that you say or do, then what you need to be able to do is claim or reclaim, if it's a habit when you're communicating with this person, claim or reclaim the responsibility for the impact of the message. Now, some of you, when you got to work at Headcount, you found your people, right? So, like, you instantaneously know exactly what to say. You know what jokes to say. You don't even have to use full sentences. Like, you're just boom, get it. I get it. It's great. I love it here. Blah, 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 blah. So you can reclaim responsibility for yet again a successful connection, right? And it deepens you make meaning of the conversation. It worked out great. We're connected deeper than the conversation we're having. We can finish each other's sentences. You're my work spouse, right? The impact on our connections even better and more successful. Fabulous. That's probably true. It is also the case that you probably consistently miscommunicate with the same people over and over again. And sometimes it's because you start the conversation with, we are about to miscommunicate. Here goes. So instead of making a decision that I'm going to better connect and I'm going to have an intentional conversation, you start with, well, let's see how fast this turns into a dumpster fire. Okay, that is not the posture you're looking for. So when you have your intended meaning of the message that you're trying to deliver and it goes, it is possible that it was congruent. It lands congruent with your intentions. Great. That could mean negative to negative, positive to positive. Great. That was congruent. It is possible that it will be incongruent. You meant it as negative and it landed super positive, and you're like, well, shit, that didn't work. That was supposed to be a reprimand, and they're like super stoked about it. Damn it. It could be positive to negative, right? Like, I think this thing is hysterical. Let me tell you this very funny joke. Whoops, bad timing, not funny, right? It could be incongruent. Either way, you are responsible. Occasionally, if not rarely, sometimes, rarely, you are gifted with the feedback that it was congruent or that it was incongruent. But most of the time, you are not gifted with that feedback, except for the little tiny hairs on the back of your neck. The little tiny hairs on the back of your neck, they usually know. Now, you might be rehearsed at quietening them down. I basically live with a shoe in my mouth, so I just kind of ignore them after a while with certain people because, look, I overstep my boundary again because I use examples that make people really uncomfortable. I turn everything into a joke and that makes people very uncomfortable. All of these things are true. What is interesting, though, is that if I were to pay attention to the little hairs on the back of my neck, I would know. Maybe not be right, but I might have more information if I think it was congruent or I think it was incongruent. Then I can still take responsibility for what I think happened and then analyze, okay, so if I were to make meaning from this particular thing, did that go well? Did that not go well? Is it nebulous somewhere in the middle? Do I need to do a follow-up? There's a difference between follow-up and fixing. Fixing is from a power place. Follow-up is from a vulnerable place. And then ultimately, what was the impact of this particular connection, this conversation, on our whole connection, my relationship with this person? Now, if it is a stranger that you will never see again, you can still go through this whole process. If you are replaying a conversation in your head where you want to be a winner, you can go through this whole process without the other person even being present. If you are engaging with the voices in your head about the messages you have learned about your entire life, you can engage in this entire process. If you are apologizing or writing a statement or taking responsibility or putting a stake in the ground about what the moral compass and what the moral standing is for this organization, either way, you can run it through this process and determine the possibilities of what the impact of it are going to be. And then you can pick the one that you want. And the worst thing that's going to happen is that you were wrong. You're totally off base. But at least you can take responsibility for the planning and the intentions that you were attempting to do because you actually worked through the process instead of like being blindsided by being wrong, which blindsided usually immediately comes with defensiveness, usually produces way more speech that also hasn't been thought about. So slow your roll and use this like intentional slow process. Then you can at least have a known loop of responsibility about the impact, positive, negative, better, or worse, still neutral on the connection that you're making. Doing that is the action, I believe, of really true ally work. So with that, I'm going to pause and remind you that you can text message me at 202-670-4262. And then for the rest of the time that we have together, I'm going to stop screen share, because what I want you to be able to do, I'm assuming you all have this flow chart. If not, please take a screenshot of it now. But what I want to do is stop screen share, and in the 15 minutes or so that we have, I want to invite you to use chat, send me a text message, or unmute and share, talk about the collective of the four, about your given situations, anything that I can possibly help with. This is like the one-on-one consulting part, that if I can be helpful, I'm more than happy to. And if something's going on that this is not the most comfortable methodology for that one-on-one, you can always text message me afterwards, after today. So I'm here to help. And I think if we go all the way back to the first webinar, diversity, a starting place, you're also, like a flowchart, getting back to the beginning. This is just the start. And I know that it's been a very hectic last couple of weeks within the organization, and don't underestimate the next few weeks, right? Like, remember the Australian wildfires? We thought that was going to be the big thing we remember in 2020. Who knows what is coming? But you at least now know what you don't know, and know a little bit more about what you do know, and have some actual tools to better communicate, be a better ally to all, learn from the messages of your own lived experience, past and continuing on, checking your conscious and unconscious positive and negative bias. Goal, why not try to become more conscious of what you're unconscious of? Because ultimately, that's what shapes your worldview and how you are showing up, who you are when you are showing up in the world. Again, my mantra is do the best you can with what you got some of the time, because some of us have to in order to thrive or even stay alive, and others of us can treat this stuff like a hobby, depending on what our privileged and dominant identities are. And great, treat it like a hobby then until it becomes a practice. But if it's becoming a hobby, your consciousness will kick in, and you will actually practice these skills, and you will get better, and you will serve people better as an ally. And the work that you do will matter, even though it will be riddled with mistakes and learning lessons. Do the best you can with what you got some of the time. That is pretty much everything I stand for. So I hope everyone's gotten a screenshot. So I'm going to stop share. And I just want to check in. How are you doing? Thoughts, comments? Katrina, you do not have to go first. There's evidence of other extroverts.
I just really love the platinum rule. I mean, I think about like love languages too, and with that, and treating people the way that they need to be treated and like cared for and spoken to, and not in the way that, you know, you want to speak to them in that moment or how you would like it yourself.
Yeah,
Important.
so if you are interested, Tony Alessandra actually has trademarked the term platinum rule. It's all of his research. He has a book cleverly titled The Platinum Rule. And what's interesting about that book, and I kind of shared this before, but when I read Fierce, Difficult, Courageous, and Crucial Conversations, I had also read the Platinum Rule book. And what is fascinating, and maybe this is again capitalism and that's a different workshop, but even the Platinum Rule, the last third kind of turns into how to get your car for a better price, right? And that's really, it was very important to me when I wrote my book for it not to turn into some kind of manipulative Jedi skill, but to keep it in a really uncomfortable self-work, self-centered, self-identity, self-responsibility focus. So that's what I tried to do. So, but it's a great book. Tony Alessandra. Other thoughts or comments? No texts have come in.
Well, I'll say something. I think, and Jess, thanks so much. I hope we've all found this I'm sure in different ways we all connected with a different part of all this, and I hope it informs our, how we approach things going forward. I think one of the things that's interesting is that headcount, we know we come from a part of the music world that is very homogenous. And I think it's interesting to look at ourselves and say, how much are we just sort of used to that and accept that? And how much does our eye gravitate toward that in a way where we want to change it? And I think that there are many people who would look at our artist roster, and their first response is, wow, there's a really cool bands. And then there are many people who look at our roster and say, wow, this isn't very diverse. And Jess, I don't know if you have views on this, but I think that part of getting, changing our culture is to every single person on our staff. Like, I think it's all of us to have that eye where we say, hey, maybe this isn't how we want it to be. Maybe this doesn't represent America. And what are the affirmative steps that we can take to change it? And get to a place where we're always thinking that way. That's just my take. That's sort of my kind of leadership take, that's an important thing for all of us to internalize, and then really think about what we can do as individuals to change what things look like today. So I don't know how people feel about that, but that's definitely a place that I land.
Great. Other thoughts or comments? I think the follow-up I would have about music, and only because Andy, you said something yesterday in the small group that got me thinking about music, and I think music taste is such a great example of an echo chamber that, like, within the music collection I feel that my music collection is very diverse, right? That it's all over the place. And a lot of that, I think, is connected to the emotional experiences and the timeline and the memories connected to the music that I listen to. And it wasn't until, like, I really started looking at, like, all of the women artists that I love are all depressing chick music, right? They all have long hair. They're all size 0. They're all, like, under 5 feet tall. They're all white. They generally play a guitar, and they're super angry and powerful. I didn't do that on purpose, but, like, I didn't know that Brandi Carlile was, like, an avatar in my life. And then when I started looking at, like, new music or, like, independent artists, right? Like, they would attribute inspiration to them of being Brandi Carlile. So it's just the same, even though to me it feels wildly different based on, like, something that's highly produced or something that's like a bootleg cassette tape I still have from the 1900s, right? Like Ellen Cherry, which maybe no one has heard of, like, is, to me, feels very different until I look at it from an identity lens, right? And that Ellen Cherry could be casted to play Brandi Carlile. And I didn't think about that, right? I also really like country music, and I don't like new country music. I like old, twangy, awful, inappropriate, don't listen to the lyrics, but just, like, sing along while you're cooking kind of music, right? I'm not allowed to tell anybody that. So then when I'm in person and people are like, play music while people are walking in, I'm like, please feel free to use your own phone, because I don't know what's going to pop up on my thing. And I know it's not going to be diverse in the sense, let me take it back. I know that it is likely to not be inclusive of everyone in the room based on the language that I know is used in some of the terms, largely because, like, John Prine might be amazing and is hella sexist, right? And maybe I am too. And I really like music, right? So what does that mean? And John Prine is still white and oddly under 5 foot tall. So, like, there's, like, a commonality that I haven't really noticed, even though I feel like it's very different. But to someone who doesn't listen, in this case, to Ellen Cherry, Brandi Carlile, or John Prine, they may see all three of them would very likely be in the same tour bus. And that's what I think is the critical lens when we start thinking about diversity, is that it's not just, well, I listen to Darius Rucker too, right? Like, oh, thanks for tokenizing, like, one of the few men of color who actually have made it in popular country music. And it's not about being historical either, right? Does that make sense? It's about recognizing and noticing how insular an echo chamber can become to the point that it actually can pitch itself as very diverse. But it's really just about like honing in the specifics within the same kind of echo chamber, not just gathering different tokens that look different. Not saying that that's what you were saying, Andy, but like that, after our conversation yesterday, that's what I was going through when I was like picking music, playing dinner. Every single thing that my Google Home or whatever was randomly picking could have been the same artist, and then got really creepy because it was the same artist doing covers of other artists who had just done a cover of that artist. And that's when I was like, oh, hello, echo chamber, right? Like, this is who I am. This is what the algorithms say that I like. And if I'm your target market, that's great. Who else is your target market? Programmatically, it is possible that you could have a wide variety of programs that when you look back, cover a wide variety of interests or tastes or audiences. It might be unlikely or impossible for one program to be completely inclusive of everything all at once. I don't know, but it's certainly things to think about.
Jess, on that note, I'm actually curious if you have any suggestions for, us as an organization. Like, Andy, I love your suggestion there about us all kind of having an eye towards this and how to make different parts of our work more diverse, especially as it comes to working with artists or partners. But I also have the sense that it really is going to actually be a top-down thing, right? Where we need to be able to say as an organization, these are the communities we really care about engaging, and then setting specific ways that shows up in different work areas around the organization. And I just don't know like what level that kind of comes from and what it's going to take to do that. And so, Jess, I'm curious if you have any suggestions for like what that could look like as kind of a next step potentially here.
Yeah, so I mean, good question, and like way to get your money's worth at the end, right? That was supposed to be a joke. Oh, you're all muted. So, okay, good. Loud laughter. Thank you. So what I think is interesting, and this came up a little bit too in some of the conversations, is if I were making a suggestion, I think every single one of you in your own role and how you perceive you are being evaluated or your performance is being evaluated and how you perceive your job description dictates the reality of what your job is. So I just want to clarify, there's a lot of assumptions right there because I don't know y'all very well. But if you take your job, how you believe your performance is evaluated and how you believe your job description is written, and without having to add a new bullet point or add a new rubric for you to be evaluated on, what are you currently doing that isn't like, well, these are the applications we got, or, well, these are the sponsors that we got, or like, well, these are the people who said yes, right? Like, there's other verb options. I don't know everybody's jobs, right? But if you can evaluate what it is that you are doing, where you have the opportunity to significantly diversify your vendor list, your supplier list, your go-to people list. When I worked, I did a consulting project with a wedding management company. And one of the things that was fascinating is they were like, well, these are the brides that come to us. And these are the list of the top 10 venues that we usually use. And here's the top 10 DJs that we usually use, and caterers and photographers. And I was like, fantastic. Can we look at those lists? And are there other vendors that you could use? And they said, well, there's just really not any good photographers that happen to be people of color that are in town. And I was like, really? Because this is the Bay Area. I'm pretty sure there's somebody with a camera who has a significantly successful business that you don't know about because your network isn't connected to their network, right? So like diversifying your list of suppliers and vendors and hires and interns and marketing outlets and sponsors and where you put the ads or where you don't put the ads. Oftentimes, to me as an outsider, and I am very aware that I am not inside y'all's world, right? I don't know your limitations, but from out here really does sound like, well, I don't know why they're not coming. I mean, the door's open. They can come here anytime they want, right? well, the bus doesn't run there, right? Or like, you haven't advertised the meeting in a way that other people can see or hear. Well, it's not my fault they don't read email, right? Well, that's the equivalent of putting marketing on MySpace and wondering why people aren't seeing it, right? There are very few people who even know what MySpace is. And I don't think you can even have an active account anymore, but I had one and it was epic. Just saying. When we are outdated and comfortable, we are not actually providing opportunities for a diverse space. And that's not one person's job. That's not two people's job. That's not, I forgot now who it is that supervises the interns. I think it's Sarah. So that's, Sarah is not in charge of the interns as far as I'm concerned. Now, the job description may be like in charge of the interns, but the interns are having an experience with headcount as a group. Their intern experience is all y'all, right? So what are y'all all doing? So that would be the first thing I would do. So good question, Elise, but I would say the first thing is looking at your own job performance and your own job description. Now, I'm not saying like you should develop your own fire me letter, right? Like no one in no organization in the United States that I have ever worked with across my 23-year career is nailing this. Okay, so the bar's real low. So, but if you look within the context that you have, where are you super comfortable? Who is on speed dial, right? And what would happen if you like, no pun intended, diversify who is on speed dial? What research have you done of places you don't know, right? So part of what ends up happening in creating a culture that can feel diverse, but is actually pretty samey, is that we are limited by our comfort and our familiarity. And we tend to be comfortable and familiar with people that we know. They're like a go-to yes. Another association I work with, they often have this event that has small group facilitators. And the same people always get asked to be facilitators, and they're not even professional facilitators, but they're easy yeses. But your crisis or your time management or your urgency does not erode the opportunities of somebody different than the people you know being able to do an amazing job. If you need to put it into numbers, there's a very good possibility that you are wasting money on someone that is a yes because there's someone who's cheaper and better that you don't know about, but they're comfortable, right? So if we're talking about doing new things, it can't be your favorite sweats. There's nothing wrong with your favorite sweats, but your favorite sweats are your favorite sweats that have now limited the view of what is possible. And Andy is not responsible for naming what is possible. Like, just because he's the jefe, he's surrounded himself by incredibly competent people who desperately know how to do their job. And in desperately knowing how to do your job, from what I can tell in our limited conversations, actually like the autonomy you have and the ability to do your job. So then report up, much like when at least you said that this is kind of coming from up. Y'all are the ups. Andy is not the up. The directors are not the ups. I want you to think about a volunteer who's not even getting paid, or a participant at one of your events, right? They're actually, quote unquote, at the bottom. If you need to, think of the person who's never heard of headcount yet. They're at the bottom. Everyone above them has the ability to know more stuff. Great. So then that includes you. So then of you having the ability to know more stuff, share in the responsibility of figuring out what could you do? Where else could you go? Where could you post job descriptions? Where else could you put advertising? Who else could you seek as a sponsor? What other artists could you use? What other AB teams could you use? Who else could be board members? Who else could be regional directors? Who else could be volunteers? Who else could be partners? Who else could you kind of like glove partnership with so that these people see this and these people see this? Those are like literally global conversations that have to take place if you're going to shift culture within your organization globally. But we end up screwing this up by either outsourcing it to someone like me. I mean, I got a mortgage to pay, right? But I can't do anything and make it last. Or it's one person's job, or maybe three people's jobs, or it's just the board, or it's just the executive director, or it's just the directors. And that is literally how it doesn't work. So then what could you do different? I did not know I was going to get on a soapbox about that, but I evidently have some feelings. My therapist would say I have some feelings.
Well, if no one's going to say anything, I'll say something. I really hope that this is, Jess, I appreciate that sentiment a lot because I think it does tend to, this is on all of us, every single one of us. And it's just getting back to it's how we approach our jobs every day. I appreciate Molly's honesty in the statement that she just put up. And I find the word choice really interesting, the word burden. And I think it's a very honest view of how this has been viewed. I think it's sort of like viewed as a thing that makes our job harder and not flowing naturally. And I think that's okay. I think it's okay to recognize that. I think change takes work. I think that to Jess's example about the wedding folks, it's easy to go to the people you know, and it's a lot harder to go to the people you know. But your hope is that when you expand who you know and who you go to, it becomes more natural and you find pockets of success, but it won't happen from day one. So I just, I hope we all feel confident and emboldened, but also recognize that if we classify this in our heads as a burden, it will never come naturally. We have to start thinking of it as an opportunity to be better. We have to think of it really as we haven't finished the job until we've put our attention into these matters. It's not and on top of that, I've got to do this too. It's somewhere has to be baked in, and we all have to develop the eye that maybe we've had and maybe we haven't, and all of our eyes are different, so that this is a starting place, not just, I got to add this in. And it's hard every day. It won't be like this, but I think the more we do it, the more natural it becomes.
And I would add, if I'm trying to choose my words because I want to keep our small group confidence in what we talked about yesterday. So the words that I'm going to choose is that it seems to me, at least in the languages I've had with the executive director and the director, that there is across the board acknowledgement that this is a very strong team. And often burden and chore can kind of be interplayed with each other, but it's across a power dynamic, right? So the people under it feel burdened and the people over it feel like it's a chore. And so I want to be mindful that, like, whatever word you want to use, you need to be doing this in order for you to thrive. And from my absolute partisanship, this is a very important year. Please do your job, and however I can do, whatever I can do to help you, I am down. With that stated, the chore burden dynamic also has kind of a them in the yucky way connected to it, right? So like if I'm a parent and I have kids, which first off, you're welcome, that is not true. But if I am a parent and I had kids, I'd have a chore list. I'd have checks and balances, and I'd want numbers, and you get a star or you don't get a star, or you're financially rewarded. Or in my finance homework, one of the things you do to mitigate risk is you link people's payment to the success of a particular quantifiable measure. Ugh, I don't want to do that. So I am a pinko commie liberal, so of course I don't want to do that. So I just want to mention that, like, if as a supervisor or a director or a manager, if you have a chore list you have to manage, and thriving and surviving into the future is one of those chores, then that's going to become something that you count and not something you shift and do. And shifting and doing is going to shift and change the culture versus counting. If you need to count to become aware so that you can then shift and do, great. But know that that's the first step of a cycle. But while you're counting and figuring out the first step of a cycle, those of you that are supervised or managed or directed or led by others are going to feel the burden of this time, right? So then I often say that my learning curve could be steep and I could be deep, deep, deep in it. But while I'm learning, suffering is happening. And it's the end of that suffering that is the motivation for me to learn as quickly as possible. But no matter how quickly I am learning, suffering is going to exist. So me rushing to learning does not absolve suffering that exists. They're happening simultaneously, and it sucks. And welcome to running an organization with moving parts. So I would invite the recognition of it can also feel very burdensome to not have a map and to not know how to do this. But like that involves like trust and faith in one another and being able to do that. And I would think if you autonomously were, and I don't even know if this is possible, right? But if you were autonomously allowing every single person connected to the organization to do a position analysis or a position assessment and report back how low-hanging fruit, for lack of better words, has been the go-to move in their own roles, and to identify that's the equivalent of big companies like rewarding failure and rewarding innovation. That you can't have innovation without failure. So like, you know, saying you get 2 tries or you're getting fired, which I'm not saying any of you have ever said, but that the second try, I'm terrified. So like, no, keep trying. What other feedback do you have? If there could be a window, even if it has an end date, where that information is received and rewarded and appreciated, and then there is an analysis of themes in that, because you have a D&I person coming up, that could be really helpful information to be able to figure out what is the strategic plan and what is the timing of the strategic plan, because now you're shifting and doing. And it's a way that you can share that responsibility versus having a chore chart on the fridge. So I can't keep up with the posts. And now it's 10:30. Or to me, it's 10:30. It is not 10:30 to most of you. Or any of you. Except for West Coast or Michigan. But still not 10:30 for you. Any other last parting thoughts, comments? Am I being thought-provoking? Am I causing problems? I mean, I don't care either way. I hope I'm thought-provoking.
Well, I think we should all unmute ourselves and say thank you to Jess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess.
Thanks, Jeff.
More than welcome. Happy to help, and I'm in your pocket if you need me. You know where to find me.
Thanks so much.
Dun, 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 dun. Look, we started at the beginning where we started. Shannon and Sam, you were the first two at the first one, I think, weren't you?
I always forget how to exit these things. Thank you, Jess.
No worries. Bye, Sam. Tell Austin I said hi. Bye, Shannon.